Hey, I'm back today with another video, but I decided to do something a little bit different. Today in my video I'll be going through a little bit of my Super Nintendo collection. Now, the Super Nintendo was one of my favorite consoles, probably my absolute favorite console even to this day, and it's mostly because of all the great games that are on the system. I'm going to start going through my games alphabetically and do the first 25 or so in this video. Now, the first title here is The Seventh Saga. This is a classic old-school RPG. Plays almost similar to some NES games like Dragon Warrior, which was the first RPG I ever played. You play as one of 7 different characters, all of which are fairly memorable, and you travel across the world into dungeons and slog through lots of combat. It's a game that requires patience, though, because it does require you to level grind quite a bit. Here we have ActRaiser. This is an absolute classic title. It's almost like a precursor to Soul Blazer, if you ever played that, in terms of the style of the game. Now, this game has 2 main different types of gameplay in it. In some levels, you play side-scrolling beat-em-up levels, where you slash enemies with a sword and cast very cool magic spells. And in others, you play as almost an angel kind of character who protects the cities and fills the towns. So it's a very varied game, and it's enjoyable in a lot of different ways. I've actually completed this title. Here's the sequel, ActRaiser 2. This game got a lot of criticism because of its difficulty and strange control scheme, I guess. This is a game I actually enjoy. It basically doesn't have the simulation levels like the first game. It only has the action-packed, side-scrolling levels. It has pretty cool bosses, interesting levels, and even though it's difficult, I still recommend the game. I have not beaten the North American version of that title, but I have beaten the European version, which is slightly easier. Here we have Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Eye of the Beholder. This is a great game for people who are into the newer titles, like, say, Baldur's Gate. It had a lot of core, D&D elements in it that are present in more recent games, even though the presentation might not be quite as polished. You play as a party of 4 people, I believe, and you crawl through dungeons fighting enemies like snakes, crazy spiders, goblins, all kinds of things. You get cool spells, you collect weapons. It's an interesting title, it's classic. Haven't beaten it yet, but I want to do that. The Adventures of Batman and Robin. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, but it's one of the ones I don't like very much. It has good gameplay in certain parts, like the combat's good, and the graphical style is interesting. But the problem is it punishes you way too much and makes the game overly difficult in certain parts, where I don't think it should have done that. Here we have another platformer. This is Aero the Acrobat. Maybe not one of the more famous platformers on the system, but it's still a good one. Something that's fun to pick up and play for a little bit. It's not a game I've taken the time to master, but I do want to play it some more in the future and get better at it. American Gladiators. Yes, I like the TV show, and yes, this game is absolutely terrible. The game isn't well designed. The controls and gameplay elements are counterintuitive. It just doesn't play very well. The graphics are especially bad as well, which makes it even worse. I'm not any sort of graphics whore, but I really found the graphics made this game feel even more difficult to play and sort of like a bad knockoff. Arcana is a game that is quite enjoyable but not exactly popular. It's another turn-based style RPG, not dissimilar from the Seventh Saga. You crawl through a lot of dungeons in a first-person perspective, but fight enemies in a classic turn-based manner. It makes the game fun. You can control multiple characters. And overall, it's a great title when I still want to fully complete. Here's a very terrible movie-based game, Batman Forever. There's nothing to really like about this game. I can't say anything really positive about it. I guess some of the story points are like the movie, but the gameplay isn't really that great. It has stupid puzzles. The combat feels like a bad ripoff of Mortal Kombat. The graphics are terrible. It's just not a fun game. Here we have Best of the Best Championship Karate. This is a game that I like for its principles and not so much for its gameplay. Although the game is sluggish and difficult to play sometimes, it's an early technical fighting game, which was pretty interesting. It doesn't play like the other titles, like the more popular titles like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. It sort of does its own thing, and I have respect for that. Still not one of my favorites, though. Now, if I made a list of the top 10 underrated games on the system, this title would probably be on that list. Blackthorn. This game is like a Prince of Persia style, like action platformer adventure kind of title. You actually have a gun in this game instead of a sword, but it's very enjoyable. It has lots of cool elements to it, like hiding in shadows, and various other things like cool puzzles. It's a good variety of things, really. It's hard to describe what this game is, but when you pick it up and play it, it's very enjoyable. Haven't beaten it yet, though. Brainlord. This game plays sort of like Zelda. It's an alright title. Too many puzzles for my taste. But it's a decent sort of action-adventure game, I guess. Not one of my favorites. One of the things I did like was the ability to carry familiars with you. It was a nice element added to the game, but didn't really save it for me. Now get ready for a very underrated game. Bram Stoker's Dracula. This game sounds like it should be terrible, but it's actually really fun. Kudos to my dad for getting me this as a gift. I really enjoy this game. It's a sort of action platformer that's easy to pick up and play. It's enjoyable, has a good atmosphere to it. Maybe not one of the best games on the system, but it's still a very enjoyable and very playable title. Here's Brandish. Sort of a Zelda-esque game. Not one that's too gripping or too interesting. Not much to say about this one. Breath of Fire 1 and 2. It's an alright RPG series. I haven't played it much. It has, classic elements in it, but it doesn't feel very polished. The gimmick of this series was turning into dragons to fight people, which is kind of cool, but really there's nothing else that the game, does for me. It's not that interesting, and nothing really special to me anyway. Here we have some kind of crappy sports titles. Brett Hall Hockey 95 and Bulls vs. Blazers. Neither of these games are especially great. They're kind of average, sports games. Nothing special here. Nothing like horrible, but not memorable really. Brett Hall Hockey gets kudos for decent graphics, but that's really about it. C2 Judgment Clay. Now, if you played Clay Fighter Tournament Edition, you might like this game. It has some cool new characters in it, cool background stages. This is a game that's more style over substance, really, for me. The fighting engine isn't really that polished. I think they could have made it better, but it's still kind of a fun game to pick up here and there. But if you want a really good fighting game, play the good stuff like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Killer Instinct. Kakoma Night in Busyland. If you've never played Kakoma Night in Busyland, it's sort of like a very colorful version of Quicks. If you've ever played Quicks, it's definitely not what I was expecting when I purchased it. I expected some sort of RPG or action adventure, as you can probably see from the cover art here. But you actually basically play as this little marker, and you draw squares on the screen to basically take up areas of the screen, and once you get to a certain percentage, you get to go on to the next level. You have to avoid all kinds of things flying around, and enemies and traps and things. Cal Ripken Jr. Baseball. This is just a kind of crappy sports game. They put Cal Ripken on it to make it sell, but I wouldn't recommend it. Nothing special. It's kind of slow. Not really that well done. Captain America and the Avengers. There are lots of great superhero games on this system, and this is definitely not one of them in my opinion. You play as Captain America and his buddies, and sure, the game's kind of fun, but it's really not well done. They could have made it more polished, could have made it more balanced in terms of difficulty, could have made it more interesting. It's just kind of ridiculous in a lot of ways. which makes it kind of like a mediocre title, I guess. Castlevania Dracula X, in kind of bad condition, but I'm happy to own it, I guess. I mean, it's not a great title. I'd actually prefer to play Super Castlevania 4 over playing this one. But, I mean, it's a Castlevania game. It's decent. It's an action-adventure title. I don't know. If you want to play a good Castlevania game, though, I'd recommend Super Castlevania 4. And last but not least, Chrono Trigger. Man, this is absolutely classic. It's a great RPG game. It's sort of turn-based, but it has a lot of dynamic elements to it as well. Memorable characters, great story, interesting level design, and you can actually replay the game with your same characters to get them to higher and higher levels, which gives you a reason to come back and play this one. I mean, this is a game that's not going to be cheap to pick up, at least in this form, but I definitely recommend it. Also, no load times like on the PS1 version, so I definitely prefer the Super Nintendo version of Chrono Trigger. One of my top RPGs on the system. So those are the first 25 or so games out of my collection that I'd like to show you. And if you like this, I'll be back with another video showing you off a little bit more of my Super Nintendo collection. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.